Hello and welcome to the Broadcast Newsrap, your shorthand guide to the week's TV news stories, featuring the biggest news of the week. On Monday morning's Good Morning Britain, Piers Morgan was boldly denying Meghan Markle's claim that she had thought about committing suicide. One studio storm off and 41,000 Ofcom complaints later, he was gone. After a whirlwind 48 hours, we welcome Beck2 head Philippa Childs to the Newswrap this week to dissect what this means for ITV and talk about the broader campaign to end bullying in the TV sector. All that, plus what we've been watching on this week's Broadcast Newswrap. And so we're delighted to welcome Philippa Childs onto the Newswrap this week. Philippa is the head of Broadcasting Union Beck2. She's been a central figure in the TV sector's fight to end bullying long before a man called Piers Morgan stormed off his stage earlier this week. Philippa, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Good stuff. It's a pleasure. So very, very briefly, for anyone not familiar with what's taken place this week, Piers Morgan has stepped down from a 5-year stint as the co-host of Good Morning Britain. Piers vaguely attempted to row back on Tuesday morning's episode of GMB, but he ended up storming off stage after being criticised by Alex Beresford. And if you haven't watched the clip, you really should. ITV announced he was leaving later that day, shortly after Ofcom revealed it would be investigating GMB. But the broadcaster ITV, which is currently running a Get Britain Talking mental health campaign, didn't say too much beyond a 2-line statement. And I think that's something that we'll be talking about. So it's clearly been a bit of a week. Philippa, I'll bring you straight in. Were you surprised by the chain of events that I've just described that took place between Monday morning's GMB and Piers Morgan standing down later on Tuesday?
I'm not sure that I was surprised, actually, because of the veracity of the comments that he made, and to suggest that somebody who has spoken out about their mental health problems to the extent that they considered suicide, is a fairly extreme thing to do. So I can't say that I am surprised, given what's happened over recent times.
Did you expect that Piers would leave, though? Is that kind of how you thought that it would play out, or were you expecting a kind of another outcome from ITV?
I think that presumably part of their consideration was that ultimately no individual is more important than the brand. And I think this has been part of the problem around the various controversies surrounding Piers over recent weeks, not least the situation that arose a few weeks ago where 1,200 freelancers wrote to ITV about his response on Twitter to a comment from Adil Amani about whether or not he would want to work on a show involving Piers in the future. And I think the whole issue around bullying and harassment and, in fact, mental health across the industry, they're so huge at the moment. And I think, you only have to look at the film and TV charity research into mental health in the industry, which shows that it's much greater across the industry than it is elsewhere in society. For everyone to think about, or for everybody to really think that they should be focusing on the issue of mental health, how they make working life for freelancers better in the industry, and really about, giving everyone dignity at work, whether they're a freelancer, an employee, or whatever. And so I think the whole dynamic of someone who is as powerful as Piers responding to someone who is a freelancer within the industry in such a unpleasant way sort of suggested that things were going badly wrong anyway, and that at some point ITV would have to address his position on the show.
But in keeping with that, Philippa, it's interesting you mentioned that. With that in mind, if there had been a collection of things brewing, were you surprised that ITV weren't more on the front foot? Should they have been more on the front foot? And I suppose because they haven't necessarily addressed it post his resignation, what opportunity do they have to put make a strong stance on this, or make a stance on this, a proper stance on this?
I think they should have been more on the front foot, and lots of people were, including me, were very disappointed at their response to the letter from the freelancers. I mean, you can contrast that with the swift action that Channel 4 took recently as well, in parting company with Ant Middleton, and making it clear that it was about his behaviours and not about social media posts, that was the reason that they parted company. So yes, I am disappointed that ITV haven't been more clear and more outspoken about, you know, what resulted in what caused their decision this week. From what we've seen, it's quite clear that there were lots of people involved in the programme who've been unhappy in recent times about Piers' behaviour, and I would imagine that the atmosphere has not been good. And it is, you know, I go back to what I said earlier, I think he had become too powerful, and it was all about him and not about the show anymore.
Is there a concern that people that Beck2 represents, that, as you mentioned about being too powerful, that if there's a groundswell of opinion on this, and there's been a, you know, the letter sent orchestrated by Adil, that, you know, that there's more than just, it's more than just an ITV problem. There's a problem across the board, and people don't feel empowered, even in this stage, you know, period where people should feel more empowered to speak up.
Yeah, definitely. I think the pandemic has caused freelancers in particular to really reflect on their place within the industry, the treatment that they experience, the long hours that they experience, and some of the unacceptable behaviours that they experience. And, you know, we are currently getting more calls about bullying and harassment across the industry than about any other subject. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Our unscripted branch launched Unseen on Screen, and some of the stories that our members were sharing with us were really extremely disturbing. And so I think we are at the point where we are saying some serious action needs to be taken across the industry, and all parts of the industry have to work together to resolve this issue. So, you know, it's not just about platitudes or statements or policies anymore. Actually, we have to take real actions to change the situation for freelancers.
Do you think it's a help that the Piers Morgan debacle has happened, or is it a hindrance? Like, when I think about what you're trying to do with Unseen on Screen and the wider attempts to tackle bullying in a variety of different ways across the industry, does this almost become too much of its own big thing that it kind of hinders the greater goal?
Well, I certainly don't want the whole story to become about Piers Morgan and whether or not he's an asset or not to the industry, because it's not just about him. There are examples across film, TV, broadcasting, more generally. So what I want to see coming out of it is not a witch hunt, but a real concerted effort by all of those involved to really think about how do individuals, particularly if they feel vulnerable because they're freelancers and they don't want their name trashed across the industry, how can they safely report incidents and be confident that they will be dealt with effectively?
And what do you say? I'm slightly playing devil's advocate here, but what would you say is the difference, for example, between what Piers did on Monday that has caused him to leave for whatever reason and whatever chain of events, and say the incident with Adil a few weeks ago, during which, like you pointed out, over 1,000 people signed an open letter to Carolyn McCall and Kevin Ligo. But at that point, it felt to me like Piers Morgan was kind of just brushing that aside. There appeared to be no apology, and he actually ended up double downing on Twitter. So what's the difference? And what would you say to people who just say it's him being him? He's a free speech warrior, he's combative, etc., etc.
Yeah, well, I don't accept that anyone has the right to bully another human being in the workplace, and I don't think, you know, he's certainly not alone in this. You know, if I talk to our members who are freelancers, they all know people who behave badly. They all know the people that they would want to avoid working with, and that it's a closed secret across the industry. And I think what we want to make sure is that this doesn't become about an individual personality, but that it is about making real change for everyone who works across the industry.
I wondered, kind of off the back of the closed secret element, sometimes it feels quite interesting that a lot of people know exactly who that individual is, and it's kind of common knowledge. How do we go about kind of getting everyone behind reporting these issues and seeing them happen and escalating that, rather than it being on the individual, say, who's experiencing it? Because each time everyone hears of somebody, it's kind of been a known fact that it's been going on for a long time.
I think it's a real complex issue, isn't it? Because if you, for example, were trying to deal with or trying to ensure that there was no bullying on the set of a huge production, then there will be, potentially you've got enough people there that everyone will know who they should go to. There'll be a process and all of those sorts of things. I think when you're talking about smaller productions, particularly maybe unscripted types of productions, that when you might have many less people involved, then it's more complicated. And all of the broadcasters say, well, we've got our reporting lines that ultimately, if people feel that they're not being treated well, they can report to our reporting lines. But what freelancers tell me is that they don't know what happens with the information they report. They're not confident that their reports are taken seriously or that they are investigated. And sometimes that they just don't trust the reporting lines, that they don't know whether or not they're going to be named, or their reputation within the industry is going to be impacted. So I think there isn't an easy answer, but I think we really do need to look at reporting mechanisms, which from my point of view, I want to make sure that we make a difference. So I want these problems to be nipped in the bud at the first opportunity, at the lowest possible point, rather than having to be continually escalated. And then I guess the broadcasters have to be encouraged to speak out about bad behavior where they find it. And obviously it's difficult for them if they're parting company with someone, likewise the indies. But I think there has to be more transparency, because only by having more transparency will people feel confident that the industry is taking it seriously and that they can report bad behavior without it impacting them in the longer term.
So last Friday, in fact, Ian Katz sent round email to top talent, basically saying that Channel 4 won't tolerate bullying or aggression, especially on social media. I kind of wondered, that was quite a definitive, this is our approach, and arguably Channel 4 are the only broadcaster that have made a statement as such. And I kind of wondered what the other broadcasters were doing in this space. Obviously ITV haven't made a comment, but the likes of BBC and Channel 5, does anyone have any insights on what the others are up to?
Well, all of the broadcasters are part of the Coalition for Change, and the concept behind that is a conversation about how we make life better for freelancers across the industry. So I guess those conversations are, I've no doubt that the individuals who are involved in the Coalition for Change discussions have a commitment to try and make things better. But I think, from my perspective, it was that statement last week from Channel 4 was really welcome, and I would like to see other broadcasters doing, setting out quite clearly what their approach is, and saying, in a public way, that they're not going to tolerate bad behaviour.
Was it enough that it just went to on-screen talent?
I think that was more off the back of Ant Middleton, wasn't it? But I guess the message would have got across anyway. I mean, if you're saying to your top talent, we're not accepting this behaviour, then you're really saying to everyone who's involved in making those productions that you're not accepting that bad behavior. But yeah, I do think it's important that these messages come from the top, and that broadcasters stop being quite so risk averse about what they're saying about incidents of bad behavior.
I think something that was interesting about the Piers case, and it's horrible that it happened this way, but because he said it to the public, as it were, it was a public statement of disbelieving someone's mental health struggles. It had to 1.9 million people, who however many people it was. That was a public platform for everyone to get involved. If you're an individual, perhaps a freelancer as well, with the fewest amount of job securities and things in your space, to be then suddenly see a case of bullying, harassment on a one-to-one, you have to weigh up, and Philippa, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to weigh up, is that worth you losing your job? I mean, are they going to believe you? That kind of thing. For everyone to see it happen so flagrantly was perhaps useful, because it and then we can start a conversation about changing it from those reporting lines, as you rightly point out, Philippa.
I think you're right, absolutely right. People are frightened to report. They are scared without a shadow of a doubt. And anything that encourages them to speak out and to feel confident to be able to do so is a positive thing.
Off the back of the Anne Middleton case, I mean, again, it was one of those times where maybe something else was going on behind closed doors, but that it was his persona on social media that escalated the case. And that's, again, maybe feeding a bit more into these are easier to weed out from on-screen talent that have a persona on social media that maybe winds them in trouble, but then it's like, where's the off-screen? Where are the people? How is that displayed? Whereas, Anne was easier to pull out because everyone in the public was privy to seeing it. So the talent is kind of easier to weed out in a way.
Yeah, you're right. But in the same way that there are closed secrets about on-screen talent, there are also closed secrets about people off-screen too. So I think all of these incidents and really positive to see broadcasters where they've taken action, I think will help build confidence for people to be able to talk about the issue, talk about the behaviours and the solutions, I guess.
One thing that you raised earlier, Philippa, which was interesting, you mentioned about the things that Bector is doing it at the moment, and you have some work going on in the unscripted space. I mean, obviously this is a very delicate situation, so shut me up immediately if I overset them up. But are there, the examples of bullying that you've been given? Are you able to kind of share a few of those examples to give an insight into people who might be suffering the same thing but not necessarily recognizing that it's bullying, harassment? I think there's still a lot of uncertainty over what constitutes it, and that shouldn't be, and there should be more clarity and transparency, as you said. I don't know if you can share some of those kind of experiences.
Sure. Well, I think they've ranged from, quite severe cases of individuals being shouted at and belittled and so on, right through to sort of, more low level bullying. So constant criticism, not being given credit for good work, being excluded from conversations, all of those sorts of things. So I think, unfortunately, the cases have run the full gamut, but what they have in common, I think, is the impacts on the individuals, which have really, I think everyone who spoke to us has really suffered as a result of these instances. It has impacted their mental health, it has impacted their self-confidence, and has really made them think about, their future in the industry and whether that's something they want to continue to experience in their working lives.
Yeah, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because there can be such a fine line between both what a person perceives to be bullying or what can kind of fall within that definition. And I've been having a few conversations recently with people who talk a lot about what you just alluded to, Philippa, which is emotional manipulation, in the sense of either not dishing out praise at all or making somebody feel incredibly valued 1 second and then using that power a day afterwards or a week afterwards to really belittle somebody, to the point where much beyond kind of what I've heard about before. But it sounds again like something that's so difficult to root out, and something that if there was a better procedure in place might be able to find it. But at the moment, with those kind of procedures that aren't really rooted in formality, is like quite difficult to report.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone across the industry right now is thinking about this issue and talking about this issue and thinking about what can be done in, as I say, quite a complex industry with lots of freelance workers, lots of indies of various sizes and so on, to have a really effective strategy for tackling the issue. And certainly we've been talking to the Film and TV Charity, to BFI and BAFTA, to PACT, to the whole industry really, about what are the practical solutions that we can put in place that will be effective, that will set a standard of behaviour that we expect everyone in the industry to comply with, and then to have effective mechanisms for calling it out when things go wrong on a production.
And what are some of the other big issues that you're either working on, Philippa, or are spotting? I know you've been doing loads of work on Unseen on Screen and bullying, something we've talked about a lot so far this year. Are there other big issues that you're currently dealing with?
Yes, well, obviously there's quite a lot going on across the creative industries at the moment. I guess less of an issue in broadcasting because lots of people are back at work, but there are still lots of freelancers across the industry who have had no financial support during the pandemic, and those that are still not back at work are obviously really struggling. And undoubtedly it has had an impact even in broadcasting. When we're just drawing to a conclusion, actually, a survey of our members across the whole range of the industries, looking at how the last year has impacted them in a financial sense, but also in many other ways as well. So I've no doubt that will show some very interesting findings when that's published.
Well, look, thanks so much for joining us, Philippa. We couldn't quite let you go without asking you our favourite question to ask all of our guests: what you've been watching. So what have you been watching on TV this week, Philippa?
Well, I watched Behind Her Eyes last weekend, which was
Netflix one.
Creepy, yeah, very creepy. Certainly very creepy. And of course, I'm enjoying Unforgotten and Bloodlands. So yeah, I like a good drama, I think it's fair to say. I must confess to being disappointed that I had to wait till Tuesday to watch Unforgotten after the Meghan Markle interview, but I'm sure the whole nation enjoyed that one.
On Bloodlands, I'm watching that as well. I end every episode going, what? Huh? What? There are about 1 million story threads and different changes. It's very Jed Mercurio, but he's just like they seem to have poured all kinds of different strands in together, and they're just going to let it all play out. I don't even know how I can't even conceive how it will possibly end. I mean, I suppose that's why Line of Duty is so compelling, but Bloodlands feels all over the place.
Yeah, really, really great. And James Nesbitt, as usual, is fantastic in it too. Yeah, and of course we are all looking forward to the next Line of Duty, which is not too far away, is it?
10 days, I think, counting them down. Yeah, 21st of March, right?
Oh,
yeah.
I've still never seen it. Line of Duty.
Wow.
What?
I know. I need to get on it.
You've got a big back catalogue to go through.
I've heard that.
Hurry up.
I think what was really refreshing about Behind Her Eyes was, that I don't think any of us saw that twist coming, but the way that it unfolded was really clever, but also quite, scary.
Fascinating. Well, I've not seen that either, but it sounds like that comes highly recommended. Look, Philippa, it's been brilliant having you on. Thank you so much for joining us, providing such insight at such short notice. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
So that was Philippa Childs, the head of Broadcasting Union Bectu, but John Elms and Hannah Bowler are still with me. I think there are some more questions to be asked that's kind of post Piers questions related to what ITV are going to do around new presenters. There's clearly now a big prime time daytime presenter slot for somebody to replace Piers. There's also the future of Piers Morgan's Life Stories, the documentary strand, which is produced by Multi-Story Media. So it's a different producer there. So it gets a little bit complicated. But John Elms, what kind of person do you think that they'll be looking to replace Piers Morgan with? Not necessarily naming any names, but the style of presenter.
I mean, this is a tough one because obviously I think part and parcel with the reticence from ITV. I mean, this is a bit of a speculation, but he was a ratings driver for them, so they would have execs high up would be thinking, we've got a person who draws ratings in who now, I think his position was untenable. Personally, that he's gone is right. The combative style worked. It really worked for GMB because it cut through when he was interviewing politicians. Matt Hancock particularly received a lot of his ire, and I think he was lauded for praised in some areas for holding those people to account and speaking, really tying them up in knots and making the politicians who he's supposed to, really squirm. And I think the tradition in UK British TV media has been we like presenters who can do that, especially with politicians who sometimes get an easy ride in some cases. So I think some combative nature will be important. But occasionally he would speak in with such superiority, and my opinion is correct that that led him clearly into hot water, because I don't think he necessarily thought what he said was wrong. I mean, you could tell that from when he railed back the next day. His defense of it was he was saying something else. So, I mean, I've seen an article about various replacements, a few of whom are on the Good Morning Britain team already, or past presenters like Ben Shepherd. I personally don't watch it as often as your next person along. So I wouldn't necessarily know who would be, but I think a mix of combative and sympathetic, being able to at least put people under pressure, a very strong interviewing style is needed, but also because that will drive ratings. Commercial way of looking at it, but I'm sure ITV were considering that ratings are still what drives people's interest and importance in the TV world.
I was going to say, to add, it still has to be the anti BBC Breakfast. Like, it has to be the opposite to that to make it have a unique selling point. So I think that's something I imagine they feel like they can't go too soft on a presenter.
Also, Susanna Reid's there, and Susanna Reid was often the diffuser of Piers Morgan's ire, or at least if he kind of veered into a territory that people found distasteful, she would bring him back, from what I've seen. So agreed. I think that the personality that they had, the kind of the relationship rapport that they had, worked because they were slightly different. They approached it slightly differently. Probably someone to be with Susanna Reid on the combative style would work. But who knows? Maybe this could herald a way into a different format for GMB. I doubt it. I expect they'll probably want to get someone of a similar nature in terms of their style, not what they say. Obviously, clearly they don't want the same, because they'll just be going through presenter after presenter after presenter because people will say the wrong things. So, but definitely someone with a bit of bite.
There were definitely questions raised in the aftermath of kind of Susanna getting often talked over, and kind of obviously all of this came out around International Women's Day, and a lot of the comments about Piers in that one moment was talking over his female colleague. And it'll be interesting to see if they pick someone that can kind of give her more of a voice, rather than kind of constantly be kind of shouted over. So I'd be interested from that, on that perspective.
I always found it interesting how Susanna broadly seemed to really enjoy the way that relationship worked, even though, again, I don't watch GMB an enormous amount, but it did seem so often like Piers would be uber combative and talking over her, and she would, being the diffuser, I can't imagine would ever be that fun. But I think that role really worked, and it really worked for ITV. I was looking at some ratings earlier this week, and its share has just repeatedly gone up to the point where, so when Piers joined, it was getting around 15% of morning viewers, and that's now at around 25, and 16 to 34 share has gone up even more dramatically. So it's a difficult time for ITV. I don't know, it's quite a cynical way of thinking about it, to think that it was ratings that meant that their statements have been both quite woolly, and that they weren't prepared to be the ones to push Piers Morgan out the door. But I was interested what you were saying, John, about last summer. I don't think there are many people who see themselves any side of the political spectrum who weren't in some way impressed with the way that Piers Morgan responded to the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic. Like, I was definitely impressed by it. And it got to the point where politicians boycotted GMB, wasn't it? It was like the way they were behaving towards the Today program in the earlier part of the year. And that's because he was asking the right questions. Like, I watched a couple of those videos, and he was clearly channeling his energy into something that really worked for the country as a whole. And I read this really good, just to plug The Guardian, I read this really good profile that Simon Hattenstone did of Piers about 6 months ago. And a big feature of it was that Piers just at all times feels like he has to be combative. And so it just depends where he's channeling his energy. And he really acknowledges in this interview that, like, he knows he can go too far. He gets bored and he needs like a purpose. So when it's calling out the government, when you feel like the government is not responding to a pandemic in the way it should, he's so well placed to be the presenter, to lead on that. But then suddenly, when, you know, at the moment, whatever anyone says, the government's having all this success with the vaccine rollout, and it's a lot harder to be critical. So then suddenly more trivial things get to the end of his ire. And I think in this profile, the incident with the penguin, when he said that he would identify as a penguin when he was talking to a non-binary person, and it was, I mean, it was just mean. Like, I don't know how many Ofcom complaints that attracted, but that was something where he just couldn't keep his mouth shut. And obviously it's not like anyone was really calling for him to leave after that. But it will be interesting to see if they can find a presenter with that magical mix of combativeness, but kind of sensitivities, who speaks to all kinds of demographics and can uphold those ratings. And off the top of my head, I struggle to think of somebody with those qualities, but who knows?
Yeah. When you first asked the question, I was like, I actually can't tell you who.
Yeah,
I mean, I think the morning TV is, well, for a start, it's very important to the demographic that watch it. I mean, I don't watch morning TV, and I think that's possibly because my parents didn't let me when I was a child. So now I just don't do it in the morning anyway.
I'm a big fan of BBC Breakfast every morning. Have a cup of tea.
Well, let's see,
Eat breakfast, watch BBC, watch breakfast TV.
Maybe I should be watching it. I should watch it more. Again, it's as you say. I think the what is clear in presenting now, or what seems to be presenting, is you can't, to have too much polarization on one side or the other is problematic for a broadcaster, because they either don't, say enough and therefore don't drive interest, or they say far too much that's wrong. You shouldn't say wrong things anyway. So I think this is a bit of a moot point. So that example that you gave about the penguin is, again, classic. Like, that's just, can't say that. You shouldn't be able to say that on TV. And the things he said on about Meghan Markle were horrifying.
And then there's also Piers Morgan's Life Stories documentary series that he's been hosting for a few years now. Hannah, what do you reckon to the future of Life Stories?
Well, it's only just started back its current run, I think, a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago. So it's currently running out. So I guess it will play out this season because it's recorded. But it will be interesting on that one, because if anything, Piers Morgan's Life Stories is probably the one show that he does, or the one time you see Piers where he isn't as combative and he's quite relaxed. He's quite sensitive. Like, he can often grill a little bit, but actually he handles that show with quite a lot of care. So it'll be interesting to know if ITV will just feel the pressure to drop him, or whether they'll look at each individual case they have Piers in a different setting and measure it on that basis. But it'll be interesting to know. And then I guess the bigger thing with Piers is, where does he go now? Like, where is his life outside of ITV?
I think you're right. It is slightly different, and it would almost be his choice. Life Stories, it feels like it's again in his hands. Where does he go? John Elm's Woke Watch, Andrew Neil's GB News Woke Watch. Yeah, I would be phenomenally surprised if I don't see him at one of these two new news channels for the coming months. That's GB News and News UK, which will both have launched before the end of this year. John, do you share my thoughts?
They both seem likely destinations for him, if because they'll provide a platform to be able to, for him to bring his presenting style again back to what he wants. There's obviously I don't think they anticipated necessarily that he was going to leave GMB right now. I mean, GB News is busily recruiting its on-screen talent and off-screen talent. News UK also, bearing in mind I've spoken to both of their program chiefs in recent weeks about who they're bringing on. I think GB News might be a likely spot. I mean, I wasn't the one to broach this on Twitter afterwards. I didn't actually mention it. I was just thinking about it. And then a load of people who I follow on Twitter said, I'm sure he'll turn up at GB News. So the court of public opinion has put him firmly on the on-screen talent at GB News. And, he's a big fish. Given who these people are lining up, these channels are lining up, some really high profile talent is important for these channels. So there will be conversations. I read that News UK TV had conversations with him a while back. So that there is clearly some movement there. As to whether he turns up, these GB News plays their cards very close to their chest, as I'm sure News UK will be, up until the point that they want to announce them. But I think they'll have definitely looked on that with interest. I mean, who wouldn't? Because you're like, what, this bit of talent who inspires the spiky combative debate that he brought to GMB. That's what they're looking for in their programming. That's what GB News has said they want as part of their programming lineup. And Andrew Neil said it on the media show yesterday, what you want to provide something different to Sky News and BBC News. So I wouldn't be surprised if they'll at least show an interest.
I'm hedging all my bets. I'm putting my life savings on it. And I think it was probably partly, he's been at GMB for nearly 6 years. And I think it might have been partly a driving motivator of him leaving. Like, does he really need all the aggro that surrounds what's happened this week? I think he just knows that he can walk into for him, what will be a really interesting job with two new guys. He's worked in America before. He knows how that all works. And as we've covered, as you in particular, John, have been covering GB News and News UK channels over the weeks, with the way that regulation works in this country, there's no reason why there can't be a combative Piers Morgan hour that is balanced out by a combative hour from somebody else. So it's not like he would have to completely rein himself in. The regulation is ever so slightly complicated. So let's see what happens. But yeah, I might be my life savings. Be funny if he went to BBC Breakfast. That's the thing that's not going to happen.
That's what I put my life savings on.
Yeah, you'd love it, Hannah, with your cup of tea. And now we move on to our second what we've been watching of this particular podcast. It's what we've been watching. John Elms, what's been on the box?
Well, I referenced it slightly earlier. I've been watching Bloodlands on BBC. Its last episode is this Sunday, and I'm intrigued. It's really is genuinely all over the place. Like it's got so many different strands, and I feel like there's I don't want to I can't reveal anything because I'll do spoilers, but things have happened that you go, well, hang on, isn't that like, are we now just watching the ending already play out? I don't know. So I've been watching Bloodlands and binging my way through the last series of The Sopranos, which I hadn't ever watched, which I think is anathema to most of the TV world. Everyone's seen The Sopranos, but I hadn't. So I've been binging on that, and I've got like a few episodes to go, and
I've never seen The Sopranos.
I need to finish it. I had them on DVD, and I lost my DVD remote, and I'm like, I don't know how to watch it anymore.
Hannah, what have you been watching?
I just finished The Great, the Hulu Channel 4 import. Oh, it's so good. And I've taken the time, just carve a little hour for myself out to just sit and watch it and enjoy it. And it's really funny. Nicholas Hoult is really good. I hope he wins some stuff for that because he's hilarious. But yeah, it's just, big fan. And then I'm actually just started watching Spaced. I've never seen it before.
Oh.
And I walked past the house the other day, and I was like, oh, I recognize that. I know that that's the house from Space. Maybe I'll just sit down and watch it. So I've been watching that, and oh man, really enjoying it. It's well random. Didn't expect it, but I wish more because I'm like, there's only 2 and then I'm done.
It's one of those perfectly formed comedies that lived in its space, didn't do too much, left people wanting more, and is absolutely phenomenal. Max, you always ask your contributors to the podcast to ask about what we've been watching, but you haven't had one for a while. So What have you been watching? Come on, come on, Dish.
Not very much. I finished. Well, I watched the Harry and Meghan interview. Let's talk about that. That
That's
was
true.
good.
We did
I
forget
watched
to
that.
talk about that.
I was really looking forward to that. And then I feel like it's been overshadowed by certain events that have dominated this podcast. It was good. It was funny to watch a very American style interview in the UK, I would say. Like, if that was in the UK, that definitely would have only been an hour, but it was nearly 2, wasn't it? And I think the commercial breaks in the US showing would have been insane. Like, there must have been like 1 million commercial breaks. I've never seen an extended Oprah interview, and I just think she's masterful. Like, I was just so impressed because I know it was a little bit, she's obviously like got this relationship with Harry and Meghan, and she wasn't exactly like pushing their backs up against the wall, but the way that she kind of like allowed them to speak, I really enjoyed. And it's kind of like she can just with like a facial expression, she can usher in like an emotion or another comment from them. So I thought it was really good. My favorite line from it is so cringy when Harry said, clearly he was alluding to the fact that they didn't have any money, or were going to run out of money, and he said somebody suggested the streamers, which that was my favorite line. I was like, had you not heard of them before? And God, how cringy is this? I imagine all of these TV producers that have been so desperate for a streaming green light for so long, just listening to that and being like, you are also the prince who's known by pretty much everyone in that country, but someone suggested the streamers. I wonder who that someone was.
I love that those are the conversations they have with their friends. Their friends go, oh, what about streaming? You know, that's a thing. You can do streaming. I can have a Netflix, a thing.
I loved it. I thought
it was good. I thought it was a good interview. I think we've just, by the way, Oprah for GMB.
Boom.
I think we 3 of us are 3 of the 11.3 million who watched it live, right?
Yeah.
It did feel quite of a surreal moment, though. I feel like for some reason that it didn't feel like real life for a moment. And I remember sitting back afterwards and thinking, strange that was a really big national moment, and also just it was quite surreal seeing the royal family on Oprah.
I've just loved, this is ever so slightly off topic, but we have had a week where I've not really heard the coronavirus, like barely even mentioned in a news bulletin. And I'm just loving the Harry and Meghan news. And I'm sorry for them. And I'm sorry for the rift in their family. But it is a pleasure to have different news, which is really
I think it's
dramatic.
what we all needed.
Yeah, it's so dramatic. I love it. Look, it's been wonderful to have the two of you on as ever. Hannah Bowler and John Elms. Have a fantastic week. And let's talk next week. Thank you for listening to the Broadcast Newsrap. I've been senior reporter Max Goldbart,